Look at y'all. Good people doing bad things. Bad people talking good game. Yeah. Hot take, vitriol, mansplain, campaign, maintain. Look at y'all, mad lane, god dang. Good people doing bad things. Bad people talking good game. Yeah, they want the product, not the people who make it. They want the music, not the struggle it came from. They want the love with no hatred. They want the hatred with no justification. They want the fruits without the labor, food without the flavor, books without the paper, risk without the danger, hoods with no neighbors, names with no faces. They want no problems but don't offer solutions. They want wins without the skin that was sticking from losing. They want strength without recovery, peace without justice.
Get your mind right. Trying to get my smile right.
Everything is interconnected. Ubuntu. I exist because of you. All of you. I couldn't exist. Everything is interconnected. We gotta know that. No man is an island. No woman is an island.
It's time to go to work. It's time to go to work. It's time to go to work. Get up and go to work. It's time to go to. It's time to go to work. It's day one.
For me, it was just more of a call to action that came from activism, like going on during that time period. We were already doing stuff with Zulu Nation. We had started our own chapter out here, so we were mobilized as a community, and we were doing big feedings in parks for unhoused people, joining protests here in San Diego. That all funneled into the summit. Within hip hop, we always had this kind of code that we were brought under, that you involve your elders, you involve the story and tradition of hip hop. Like, you don't move just on your own. You move knowing that like this whole history is on your shoulders, moving along with you. Everybody feels like they can move any way they want in this scene, in this culture, and nobody's holding them accountable. We used to call it pulling your card or getting your card pulled. But what it meant was people used to check each other, and it didn't feel good to be checked. I got checked, everybody got checked. You got checked if you moved outside of a certain framework. And that's how the information stayed consistent, and it stayed, orally passed along. So I think that what we were trying to do, obviously, like with the summit and things like that, is continue that method of oral transmission through the panels and what have you. Well, the Vanguard idea really came about after all the injustices that kind of just happened one after the other. Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, criminalizing, people of color, especially darker skinned people, for years and years by the police. So this is just like layers upon layers. We sort of said collectively, like, where have we been the last 20 years? Like, as hip hop. Rockefeller, Quickstep, myself, House from Arizona, and we just said, look, man, it seems like there's a need for like a vanguard of sorts to help regrow hip hop culturally again. You cannot ever say that hip hop is not an activist culture. You're practicing these art forms, but it's the collective community connection that makes it hip hop, because that's the movement, right? They always say like hip is the knowledge, hop is the movement. It's so important locally to stay connected with your community, to bring forth issues from your community, and to organize like collectively with your community. And bring back Black presence to our community. Now, what the greatest part is, I think we're seeing 20 years later, we're ready to move again.
You got me, motherfucker, get it off of your chest, yes. You got me, motherfucker, get it off of your chest, yes. yes, yes.
If you go to any barber shop, if you talk to anybody in Southeast, have you been pulled over by the police? Have you been hassled by the police? Everybody's gonna, it's like a stupid question. They're like, yes. But if you ask them, well, what did you do about it? Nobody's done anything because it's become normalized. And so what we're trying to do is change that culture, making sure that we hold police accountable. In addition to teaching at San Diego City College, I also founded Pillars of the Community, which is an organization that essentially advocates for people who are negatively impacted and targeted by law enforcement. We kind of do that in two ways. One is just community building and policies locally in San Diego that have to do with policing and law enforcement, but also on a statewide level. When we look at the laws and we look at mass incarceration, it's really important that we understand that human beings have developed these laws, that people, mostly white men, have sat down and they've developed laws, and so it should be no surprise to us that our communities are the ones that are most negatively impacted by those laws. This country was literally built on capitalism and slavery at the same time. And so we have this kind of myth in the United States that Abraham Lincoln came along and he fought a war to abolish slavery and everything was cool for a long time. Although the Civil War was in large part fought because of slavery, and the South, for the most part, at that time, seemed to have lost that battle. That doesn't mean that slave owners embrace humanity no matter the color. What they did is they had to figure out ways, how can we stay in power? And the first solution to that was incarceration. They created these kind of obscure laws like vagrancy laws. If a black person was seen standing outside for too long, they can be arrested for vagrancy. If a black person wasn't able to prove that they had a job, they can be arrested for vagrancy. Being black in and of itself almost became a criminal act. And so once you commit that crime, you're able to incarcerate them. That's how coal, that's how mining, that's how all of the wealth that began to come, it moved from slave labor to the labor of prisoners, and we have that today. So at the time, right, they were able to make money off the labor of black people. Today, they don't even need to have the labor. All you have to do is incarcerate them, right? So incarceration in the United States is a multi-million, if not billion-dollar industry. So when we talk about community power, when we talk about black power, it's basically how do we create people who are able to push back against those interests that benefit from our being failed by those systems. We can't have a movement where we're fighting to be in the position of our oppressors. We can't be fighting to be equal to white people. Hip-hop has always been a voice for social justice. Hip-hop has always been a voice for the oppressed. The co-option of hip-hop ignores the kind of the grassroots elements. Hip-hop artists and artists in general, people who are on the ground, people who are, involved in dancing, people who are involved in graffiti art, people who are involved in rapping, they're the people who need to be able to reflect and to be able to make statements and take stances on the social issues that are impacting us on a daily life.
Peace, everybody. This is House One. Coming to you from Phoenix, Arizona, representing Furious Styles Crew, Break Life, my Chicago family, CMW, SUS, the STR, Starting the Revolution. And currently I am working as a clinical assistant professor at Arizona State University. I'm a b-boy, I'm a writer, I'm an artist. I'm a sharer of the love. And that's what we're here to do. So, the first love that I want to give out is to Cypher State. Shout out to that entire crew, that entire organization, that family. I keep an eye on those other brothers and sisters, and it's a beautiful thing to see them the way they operate in and out of Cyphers. Hip hop as a form of resistance, it's embedded in the culture. Any of the elements that you look at, and again, we can get into the discussion of what's hip hop, what's not hip hop, but we all know what feels like what we think hip hop is, right? We all know what struggle feels like. We all know what it feels like to be that outcast. We know what it feels like to be looked at much different than everybody else, to feel invisible, right? When we talk about being those invisible kids. So, hip hop as a form of resistance, as a tool of solidarity, it's embedded because hip hop is that ultimate search for your truth. Not to know why I move the way I move, meaning why am I the way I am? And you will see it whether you do graph, whether you DJ, whether you break. You're going to see it in the way you move. You're going to see it in the way you rock your letters. Do I like to freestyle or do I like to structure things? There's going to be a reason for all of that. It's finding that ultimate truth, flipping it, remixing it the way, it's going to serve you and your surroundings, the cipher that you're in with the music that's you're catching with the people that are in that cipher, and those ciphers change, right, in and out of a jam. So to me, it's automatically embedded into everything that we do. So if you just search for that, you search to be the best that you can be, the freshest you can be in any of the crafts in hip hop, you're going to automatically be in that form of resistance. You're automatically going to be bringing solidarity, right? Because it's the equalizer to all things. When those ciphers, regardless of what kind of cipher it is, it's all about what you're bringing to the table. How honest can you be, and can you put it all out here? So, Cypher State, one love, 2021, y'all. Peace, love.
A lot of the pioneers would often talk about giving back to the culture, but giving back to the community. Many hip hop heads always throw down with beautiful, amazing community events, youth workshops, showing up for the youth. I think that's from the lineage of a lot of our folks who taught us that. In a lot of ways, I see hip hop as, in many ways, like a healing for the folks in our community, and a place to share and express and exchange ideas. And it just doesn't come in a form of art trade too. So it's a lot of knowledge production happening through hip hop, a lot of base building through hip hop. I always think as an organizer, what it means to utilize hip hop as a tool to really uplift our communities, but not the entire tool. There's so many entities when it comes to understanding the terrain of activism. Activism is just one component of organizing. There's a very big difference between activist versus organizer. When you really look at it, it's about bringing people into the movement. A lot of folks talk about hip hop being universal, which it is. It is universal. But to really strengthen what hip hop universal means is to understand the power dynamics that really exist and acknowledge that, not erase it, but actually acknowledge it. Because when we acknowledge difference, we are naming our political histories. We're naming a lot of the origins that has happened to our peoples, all oppressed peoples.
What I see and what hip hop has taught me is about how to come together in community, like people, just different people from all different walks of life coming together and building together under the principles of hip hop.
I think there are really good, amazing folks in hip hop doing new, beautiful things, utilizing hip hop as a tool, lifting up and leveraging and amplifying voices who are impacted. But we've got to find some principles together as a community and take our origins and what we've learned through our pioneers and strengthen them. And there's a lot of good folks that are doing that, but we got to continue sharpening up in order to get to a principled place of struggle. So that way we can have collective liberation together. And it's not going to happen with just some individualistic approaches of representation.
Further being involved in the culture, learning about the history, learning about who the folks were and how the importance of hip hop culture in our society. I've been really thinking about, as an Asian American, what did it mean to participate in a Black cultural art form?
Had it not been for a lot of the legends in hip hop who are Black, who taught me about the origins of history, the origins of hip hop, and valuing that history taught me to value my own as a Filipinx, as well as an Asian. In understanding the origins of hip hop culture and Black folks and brown folks and other folks of color, it taught me to value my own.
You're talking about learning our own histories and learning about ourselves and coming together because of a shared experience or because of a shared idea.
You look back into the history of jazz and the blues, when the civil rights movement, or even going further back to slavery, you would understand the expression that folks had. So for me, it's looking at what is happening at the time periods of music evolving and emerging. And it allowed me to understand my own role in hip hop as well. It allowed me to understand what it meant for me to be an Asian artist. And merely knowing that I'm invited to hip hop culture, I'm invited to participate, I'm invited to stay in this space and contribute to hip hop culture. As a non-Black person, it's not my place to always have an opinion on something. I'm here to show up for my Asian folks to ask them, how are you holding the line? How are you accountable? Are you checking your accountability? Are you checking your privileges?
We as Asian Americans have work to do in this culture, in understanding how the system works, how race works. We talk about this a lot. As Asians, we are often used as a wedge between Black and white relations.
What is the foundation of white supremacy, cis heteropatriarchy? It needed capitalism to exist, so in which they needed slavery to make that happen. And so what that did was really talk about how anti-Blackness, how they made that happen, along with the genocide of indigenous folks, indigenous communities, indigenous peoples. There is that origin, but also an understanding that anti-Asian violence is actually made possible because of anti-Blackness and anti-indigeneity, a framing in which Dr. Connie One has actually named. So when we kind of understand anti-Blackness, it's its own root, which is why colorism exists in countries worldwide, all over the world. I think anti-Blackness and anti-Black racism in hip hop, it's always about understanding the ways in which we are complicit in that and the ways we embody that, because we're conditioned.
This is something that, is a principle of ASC, to really look at how anti-Blackness shows up in our own communities and how we try to unravel that. The system in the US is based on anti-Blackness. Figuring out who you are through this culture, participating, almost finding yourself, that there is a responsibility for particularly Asian Americans to figure out what their role is in hip hop.
If you start from that premise, then you can understand the work you've got to do. That includes me. I'm not beyond reproach as a hip hop artist just because I love hip hop.
Solidarity is not showing up with your own ideas and thinking of what you can do, but solidarity is also being steeped in a community and listening and following the leaders of the community. I know there's been a lot of solidarity statements, but those are just words. You have to do the work. You can't just talk about it.
I mean, that's what's the beautiful spirit of hip hop. Like, you respect people's skills and you respect that they love hip hop culture. You could travel to another country in the world. You find respect in the craft because people get you and they understand the culture. You find camaraderie in that. But I think, how are you strengthening that relationship in someone's everyday life? How are you building trust with one another? That trust is so key and so vital, because when you call in or call out someone, you can trust that friend. They're coming from a place of love.
What we've been seeing a lot in the past year is a lot of what's been performative allyship, performative solidarity. And it doesn't go deeper because there are no relationships, as Candy was saying. Both of us as co-founders of ASC, that's been really integral to the foundation, is the relationships.
Transactional comes off of, it's really honestly embodied by what capitalism taught us to be. I do for you, you do for me. People need to understand why my approach is, and many people's approach comes from a very transformative solidarity approach, which is actually a framing developed by an organization in New York City called DRUM, Desi's Rising Up and Moving. And it really talks about what are we willing to risk to be in solidarity, folks. That's the difference between transformative and transactional. So what does it mean to be an abolitionist? That's another word thrown around now. You think about folks like Dead Prez. You think about folks like Public Enemy. As an abolitionist, I understand that I have to also believe that we need to get free, all of us. We have to find a way to really transform in our communities and heal, center those who are most impacted and vulnerable or have experienced harm. But we've got to find a way on how folks are transformed and believe in people's possibilities. If you really truly want to be in part of the movement, building work, then you've got to organize. And one thing that a lot of the pioneers taught me back in the day was 3 words: organize, organize, organize. Well, organizing is not just a surface word either that you can throw around. You've got to find a political home. And what that political home, with that organization will teach you are a couple of things. It will teach you to show up and sharpen your analysis and study, because that's where you do some collective learning. Not just reading books, but they'll teach you, because you can't teach someone to be accountable. A lot of folks want to teach someone how to be accountable. No, rather you learn how to be accountable to your community. You're going to learn in a political home, in an organization that does collective teaching, collective education, how to sharpen up your analysis. We have to deepen our critical thinking skills and sharpen our analysis as artists. Because there's one thing that my good friend Dr. Emalani Case has taught me. We shouldn't shy away in fear from intellectualism. We must actually use our intellectualism to inform our activism. You can't just turn out to an action without being fully informed. And it is constant study. It is for the rest of your life.
So being a part-time organizer for me is learning as I go. It's developing my critical consciousness continuously. It's learning organizing language, studying history, reading, having conversations with folks who have lived experiences. It's developing relationships with folks who've been longtime organizers. It's really just analyzing critically the areas where I can sharpen up and do better next time. Another thing is accountability, because we are human and we make mistakes, and it's a really big part is acknowledging, putting ourselves in check too. And that's a big part for me, is putting myself in check. My biggest teachers have been my kids. So I have 2 kids, Pebbles and Doom, and from them I learned so much just being a mother. But it's through hip hop that led us to organizing, at least my family and I, to organizing. And it was through hip hop that we met Dr. DJ Cutting Candy and Dr. Grace, which led us to ASC, which has been a big part of our life. And the beautiful thing about it is that we find the essence of hip hop is embedded within our organizing work.
shout out to United Hip Hop Vanguard and Cypress State. Keep killing it, y'all. Peace.
Peace, peace, peace. It's your boy Rick Scales. 1/2 of 18 Scales. What's today? Wizards only. Fresh State, slapping heads. Cypress State too, nigga. I might up rock on y'all. I'm a musician out of San Diego, California. You know what I'm saying? Just out here doing my thing.
My name's Ryan, coming to Reveal from Rock Forest, California. From San Diego, 619. Yeah, and I'm a B-boy. And I want to make a shout out to Hip Hop, United Hip Hop Vanguard and Pillars of the Community.
Welcome to the Enchanted Garden, a healing garden. That's where all our gardens have to be healing and dedicated to our children's children. And this is our World Beat Healing Garden, a wildlife habitat, an earth-friendly garden certified, and a Monarch Way station. So please come, get healed, relax, and let the noise from the outside go and transcend in the World Beat Center's Ethnobotany Healing Garden. Hey, big shout out and a big up for Cypress State. Big up.